different aspects. I've always been into astrology, but like that really catalyzed the doors to open wide to say, who am I? Because everything that I thought I was just not adding up, or everything that I thought I was, all the identities, labels, things that I had taken on. So I started going down this path of just looking at all of these different systems and all of these different ways of understanding myself. So I learned astrology first. I dove deep into Myers-Briggs, into numerology, into tarot, into all of these different kind of modalities to understand myself. And then I happened upon human design, and this was probably around 5 years ago. And it was almost as if it was a language that I had already known, but didn't know existed. And it was like, it's this super complex system. So we'll talk about what human design is, but my favorite site to pull up your human design chart is geneticmatrix.com. You need your birth date, your birth time, your birth location. And when you pull up your chart, you get this crazy looking thing with all of these triangles and squares and diamonds and numbers and lines, and every single thing says something about you. And I always think of it as the potentials of the blueprint of who you are. And my purpose within it is to free you to be you, to free you to live your most fully expressed, most authentic path. And what human design really does is not only shows a mirror to who you are, but it shows all of these different ways that the world might have conditioned you away from that. All of these different places that you might have taken on what has been put on you by society, by family, by teachers, by ways that you could, different areas where you're super sensitive and could have maybe been a sponge for the external world. And
welcome my guest, Katie Calder. Katie is a human design teacher, intuitive guide, and spiritual mentor, among other various roles she holds. She's also known as the Human Design Lady, where she shares her vast knowledge behind the system on her platforms. Her mission and purpose in all she does is simple: to empower you to embody your truth and live your fullest, most purposeful, and most expansive life. All right, Katie Calder, so happy to have you on the podcast. This is going to be a fun conversation because, as I was mentioning, this is something I haven't yet learned so much about myself. And I know so many people are intrigued to learn about human design if they don't know about it already. And you are known as the Human Design Lady. So I knew you were the perfect person to come on here to talk specifically about human design and how we could utilize that to live our authentic self and live our purpose. And of course, fully in alignment, which is super important. So first of all, welcome to the show.
thank you so much for having me, Erica.
You're so welcome. So I first want to know, of course, how did you even get to this interest to pursue a path of teaching others how to access their human design profiles? I don't even know if you call it a profile, but how did you, or chart, it's called a chart, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how did you even get into the space to even have this interest with human design?
Absolutely. So I kind of fell into it. And I think my story is similar to a lot of different people. And I think a lot of people that you connect with and who are on these paths of connecting with their authentic self, of investigating who they are. And I was kind of on a path where I did everything right. I checked all the boxes. I got the job that I was supposed to get in corporate software, really good company. And, I had lots of friends. I did everything that should make me feel happy, fulfilled, connected to myself. And I found myself in a place where I was anything but. I was so numb to life. I was so disconnected from myself. And I randomly signed up for this yoga teacher training. And I wasn't even regularly practicing yoga, but it was like I had such a pull just to sign up for it and do something for me and kind of shake things up in my life. And it opened me up to what I would say is like my spiritual awakening and all of these other paths and potentials that I hadn't necessarily explored. And I've always been like deeply explorative and to who I am and to different aspects. I've always been into astrology, but like that really catalyzed the doors to open wide to say, who am I? Because everything that I thought I was just not adding up, or everything that I thought I was, all the identities, labels, things that I had taken on. So I started going down this path of just looking at all of these different systems and all of these different ways of understanding myself. So I learned astrology first. I dove deep into Myers-Briggs, into numerology, into tarot, into all of these different kind of modalities to understand myself. And then I happened upon human design, and this was probably around 5 years ago. And it was almost as if it was a language that I had already known, but didn't know existed. And it was like, it's this super complex system. So we'll talk about what human design is, but my favorite site to pull up your human design chart is geneticmatrix.com. You need your birth date, your birth time, your birth location. And when you pull up your chart, you get this crazy looking thing with all of these triangles and squares and diamonds and numbers and lines, and every single thing says something about you. And I always think of it as a potentials of the blueprint of who you are. And my purpose within it is to free you to be you, to free you to live your most fully expressed, most authentic path. And what human design really does is not only shows a mirror to who you are, but it shows all of these different ways that the world might have conditioned you away from that. All of these different places that you might have taken on what has been put on you by society, by family, by teachers, by ways that you could, different areas where you're super sensitive and could have maybe been a sponge for the external world. And I started what we call deconditioning. I started kind of shifting little patterns, little things, and leaning more into human design, into my human design. And nothing has not only freed me more, but also opened my eyes to explore the full potential of just what's possible. And so I was obsessed with this system, because I feel like not only was I seen, which I feel like all of us, it's kind of a deep human yearning to really be seen as ourselves. Not only did I feel so seen, but I felt free to live in a way that I felt like I was always maybe guilted or shamed for, but finally had the permission to be. And so about, I think, a year in, I had a friend who needed a human design reader, and she recommended me. And that was kind of the start of just this more and more people coming. And it's so interesting, because I was looking for an out, or looking for a different direction, and I was teaching yoga on the side, and I was kind of exploring all these different things. But I'd say the way that I fell into what is now, I think, my dream profession, and really, really living so deeply in my dharma, was just taking the steps that were so aligned, and then the world kind of responding to me in that way. So now what I do is the way that I approach human design is never, we sometimes get a little bit heady about systems, about getting attached to system. And so as someone who uses this system to share what is currently my work in the world, I always want to say that you don't need a system. You don't need human design. You don't need any of these things to help you understand who you are, to give you freedom. But as something that has done that for me, it's like, it's just, not only is it aligned, but I see the impact of this being used to really not only see yourself, but have permission to be probably who you've always known you could be, but just didn't know you had the opportunity to.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll unpack all that. But one thing I guess that comes up most is, I know a lot of people have probably heard of the Enneagram. We've heard of obviously astrology, there's personality tests. There's so much out there. And I'm just curious, human design, how does it differ? And is it something that people think is kind of woo woo? Like some people don't pay attention to astrology, don't pay attention to these things, or there's some people that kind of latch onto. I know that Enneagram was something that so many are like, I'm number 7, I'm this, and they almost attach that identity. So what I would love to know about human design is how it differs, and how do we trust it? How do we give our surrender to what that tells us, if you want to say?
Totally. So just for what human design is, I think that's an important background. It's an amalgamation of all of these ancient wisdom systems. So Eastern and Western astrology, the I Ching, the chakra system, the Kabbalistic tree of life, quantum physics, biomechanics, genetics, like basically all of these ancient tried and true modalities into this one modern system. And within the question of how do we trust it or how does it differ, um, you have to try it. You experiment with it. And so it's interesting because in my work, like in what I do and in someone who's a huge proponent of the system, I'm not necessarily here to convince anyone that it works or that this is the best way. I actually think it's a little bit problematic if we say that one system or one way or one modality has the authority on truth. I think that's where a lot of division within society comes anyway. And so if you are a diehard Enneagram person and that's for you, I think that's amazing. I think lean into that. But what I will say is that I've worked on with thousands and thousands of one-on-one clients and then many, many individuals in a group. And for me as a person, I actually am inherently skeptical about systems, which is why I learn them. I dive deep. I learn every single aspect of them. I want to know them in and out. And so as someone who's, I find flaws in certain systems for myself in my own practice, and then find ones that lead me to more freedom. I think the whole, if whether you see it as woo-woo, whether you are skeptical towards something, it's not necessarily mine to convince. But what I will say is that I'm even shocked every single day meeting new people and reading charts that are all wildly different from each other and having people in tears of feeling like, do you have a video camera in my room? Like, are you following me around? Because this is so accurate. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think my roundabout way of answering it is that how does it differ? It differs in that it's just another perspective and another lens towards you seeing, viewing, and owning who you are. And if it's the one that has aligned best for me. And so it's something that I share in a way that's really, really authentic because it is true for me right now. And I live and breathe it. And then I think one extra thing I want to say about that is that human design is growing massively in popularity right now. And we kind of saw a zeitgeist of people moving towards astrology before that. And with that, sometimes nuance is lost. And so what I find is, a lot of people, if they know nothing else, they know their energy type, and there are 5 energy types, which is manifestor, generator, manifesting generator, projector, and reflector. But your energy type just scratches the surface into all that is you. And so I think that oftentimes I get people who can maybe read what I call like traditional, more restrictive human design, which is not necessarily working in the nuance and working on a spectrum way of thinking. And so if you hear something that feels limiting, that's not the point. The whole point is that we have all of these different aspects and we have all of these different potentials that we can choose to use, the highest aspect or live in the shadow. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious because you did mention that you weren't living in alignment, if you want to say beforehand, and then this felt truest to you to live in alignment. So I'm curious, what was you before human design and what transitioned in your life by utilizing human design in your life?
1,000%. So I would say my life has radically shifted in every and all way in some aspect. Some of the main things, let's even just say how I make decisions, for example. I think we're super, super conditioned just societally to like plan our lives way in advance to have, I think even when we plan this podcast, you emailed me about a couple months in advance and it's not how I operate. It's not how I operate by my human design. Some people do. And it's like, I've had shame previously in my life of like needing to make decisions before I know. And what my human design says is that I actually don't necessarily have truth in the now. And I'm not made to necessarily make decisions super far in advance, which societally, or even if you think of like productivity or getting anything done in a business, they would say, oh, you could never do that. What I have found is that not only by surrendering into allowing myself to be actually more spontaneous in how I set up my schedule, I never miss a commitment because I only commit to things that are aligned. And so I'm never going to commit in advance. Like right? This was
That's
the date
great.
that you originally put out. And I said, I don't know yet. It was, I remember, because you put October 1st and I was like,
Funny.
I don't know yet. And then I reached back out in October 1st and I was like, oh, I do know now.
That's
but
great. That's
what would
great.
have happened previously is I'd commit to something and then I'd like get to the day of and I'm not aligned to do it. And so I'd be all in my head about a specific, do I do it? Do I not? And now I never overthink any decision because I simply don't make decisions unless they're aligned. So it's really interesting. It feels like my mind is totally free in areas and I own what's for me and what's not. I also, in how I work, in how my energy works, I do well under pressure. So previously, like procrastination is something that's thrown out all the time. And there's actually a certain amount of the population that needs a certain amount of pressure to get things done. So being in a lot of mental pressure before they have the physical energy to get it done doesn't necessarily help because they're not going to get it done until they have a certain amount of physical pressure anyway. So for a lot of different projects, whether I'm creating a course, whether I'm creating a masterclass, I know the time frame I need to do it in, and I leave it until then because I know that I'm not going to have the energy capacity. I could make myself, but I would just get burned out. It will be my best work if I do it in a shorter frame window. Other things like just really, really understanding my process of energy. If I have big bursts of energy where I get almost like hyper efficient, get tons of stuff done, and then I need pause for just play. Like I need a big period to just regroup, to pause, to be with myself, to explore my creative muses. And then I would think potentially the most overall thing is just allowing myself to change my mind often and not fully have to have everything figured out, because I'm a manifesting generator, and manifesting generators, we are always, it's like multi-passionate, multi-talented, a little bit all over the place. And our process looks like a whirlwind to the rest of the world, but it's actually supposed to be that because it's innovative and it's different. And so understanding that any external conditioning that I had around not doing things in a way that is linear or makes sense to the world, I not only don't have any shame, but I feel so confident in my own process and so confident in myself and how I operate in the world. And I feel like that freedom just, it reflect, not only does it give myself freedom and permission in my life, but everyone that I connect with, it does as well. Because again, my process isn't your process isn't mine. But if we have the ability to actually lean into what we think that might not be right, or that we've been told is the wrong way to do something, but it feels so right to us, if we actually just lean into that a little bit, we could find not only more freedom, success, whatever you want to call it, but just more of an ease of being and more of a groundedness in who we are. And so I think that I already said, if anything, but like, I think the final thing, if anything, and there's a million other final things that I could lead this to, but I feel a deep sense of peace and satisfaction and just awareness that the more I know, the less I know, and my life is going to continue to be a cycle of just like transformation. If again, the thing, if human design has shown me anything, actually, it's that my life is just massive transformation and kind of quantum leaps again and again. And the more and more I allow myself to dive into the depths, to dive into the light, to try things, to explore, to just allow myself to kind of like reincarnate again and again, not only are the easier those cycles, but the more trust I have in walking through every single one of those cycles.
It's so beautiful. And, obviously when you say everything you say, there's such freedom in everything you speak of. And I think there's freedom, I think everybody desires in their life. Like, how could we be more free? And so talking about these, the 5 types you mentioned, they're energy types. So if you could go, well, if people choose to do so, you mentioned the site
Genetic Matrix.
Yeah, that's right. So you could go to that website and it's free, and just enter, like you said, your name, first and last name, your birthing location, your birth time, and what else am I missing? I believe that's it, right?
Date.
And birth date. Yes. Enter that. And then pause this to go do that and then come back, and she's going to walk you through each one. So I did this on the site you mentioned, and I got up, and it was surprising because it wasn't one of the ones you mentioned per se. It actually said emotional generator. And that's not one of the one, I mean, generator, right? But it's an emotional generator. So I don't know anything about this. So how about this? We walk through the types, however is best to start. And let's inform ourselves a little bit of what these things mean and how we could utilize it in our life and, extend in any way we can to deepen our knowledge.
Totally. And so generator is the energy type. Emotional is your authority, which is how you make decisions. So everyone's going to have an authority before their type. I'm an emotional manifesting generator. You're an emotional generator. You can be splenic. You can be sacral. You can be self-projected. You can be ego. You can be mental. You can have all these different types of authorities. But if anything, the mind is never the authority. And what's interesting, we're going to start with generators because you are a generator. And your energy type, it doesn't have to do as much with your personality. It has to do with how your energy works in the world, how you exchange energy with others, how you feel to others, how you best use your energy with a strategy. Every single type has a strategy to be in most alignment, in most flow, to have the most freedom in your life. Actually, we're going to start with the manifestors, and then we're going to go to the generators, because we have all been conditioned by the manifestors. Manifestors are about 8 to 10% of the population. And manifestors are the ones who are here to initiate, start the things, to get things going. They're here to act, and their strategy is to inform, to let other people know what they're doing and to do the thing. And what's so interesting is all of us have been conditioned that in order to be successful, we need to just start the things and force the things and go after it. And it's interesting because people hear about this being just the manifestor strategy and being like, well, what do you mean? The rest of us have to wait around and do nothing. And it's interesting because manifestors, you can read this and hear this and be like, yeah, I get it. Like, that is me. But what happens is from a very, very young age, manifestors can be conditioned away from themselves. They can be told what to do, and manifestors aren't here to be told what to do. They can be, as a parent, telling your manifestor kid their bedtime. It's not necessarily correct for them. And so what can happen is this can lead to manifestors not letting other people know what they're doing, or like informing in order to like create a freedom within themselves that they might have not had, but everyone else is kind of look around like, where did that person go, or what are they doing? And they're just doing it to have a sense of freedom. And so manifestors and all that they're doing, they're here to make an impact. And when you're aligning with your strategy, when you're acting in a way that's aligned to yourself, when you are doing whether it's work, whether it's whatever in your life that feels impactful, you're here to feel a deep sense of peace. And then when you're out of alignment, anger can kind of show up. And so if you are a manifestor, one, thank you for coming to the planet at this time. We need more lit up manifestors and aligned manifestors, because it's so powerful to see a manifestor fully own their potential and fully own who they are, and know that it's safe for them to make moves and do things, because many manifestors can fall into a deep sense of people pleasing. And so if you're a people pleaser manifestor, I would potentially go back to childhood or wherever that might have started, wherever you neglected or rejected your urges, because your urges are always telling you something. And so they're all different types of manifestors. And if you are any of the other types and you feel like some of the other types, there's so much nuance in every single human design chart. So there are manifested channels and gates and generated and projected. So like all of us, remember, as I go through all of these, you are an amalgamation of all of them in different ways. And there's so much nuance within your chart. So we start there, because then we go to the generators. And generators are like these bright, sparkly, magnetic beings, you, for example, who you're here literally, if you have one thing to do in this world, you're here to be lit up by what you love. Because when you are lit up by what you love, you create more energy and more energy and more energy for yourself and everyone else. So you've probably figured out, like, when you're doing something you love, you could just keep going and keep going and keep going. And it's like, but when you're doing something you don't love, you're like burned out or fatigued or exhausted.
This is so true.
Right? I know, it's crazy. And it's so interesting though, because generators, you feel really good to other people. If you haven't been told this, I want to tell you, you feel really good because you have this like really warm, open aura. Manifestors aura are more penetrating. Generators have this really warm, open aura. But what can happen is from a very young age, that can feel good. And you kind of have like energy leeches or people telling you what you should do, or that you're really good at this or that. And generators' biggest, I'm going to say shadow, or one that they fall into most often, is getting caught into the shoulds. Doing things because you have the capacity to do things, and you might have been praised for doing these things throughout your life. And so generators have the energy to do it, but it doesn't mean it's correct for you to do. It doesn't mean that it's what is right for you or what's aligned. And so a lot of generators can have like gut issues because you're a sacral, what we call sacral being gut issues.
I have a lot of gut issues right now.
Got a lot of gut issues. And so the thing that I would say for generators, if you have gut issues, because a lot of generators and manifesting generators, more than any other type, deal with like a lot of gut issues, is because the world has told you how to use your energy in a specific way that's not necessarily aligned. And so your strategy is to respond or to wait to respond. What does that mean? Well, as a generator, you always have something to respond to. Your friend texted you, you have an email coming in, you have a billboard that says start the business, you have an invitation to go to a dinner party. All day, every day, you have something to respond to. But what do you respond that's correct for you? And this is where we align to our authority, which I don't think we're going to get into today, but align with our correct way of making decisions, in that just because you have the energy doesn't mean you need to do it. And the more and more generators like to be busy, like it feels good to be busy in your being, but we don't want you to be busy for busy's sake. So creating like that sacred void and that pause to allow, if this is not correct, then something better is going to come in the next moment. And that's where that energy just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. So if you are a generator, I'll say the most important thing to look at in your life is just, what are all of the commitments that you're committing to that you can do because you're good at them and you have the right energy and other people praise you a lot for them, but aren't actually aligned and aren't actually fueling you, and are potentially not aligned with your sacral center, your gut, like right below your belly button is your source of such incredible power. And so where can you tap more into that area in your being and be guided by what feels super, super good and aligned? And some of the best ways to do this are just look at what's energizing you in your life. Look at what's lighting you up. Look at what feels expansive and free. Look at where your energy almost moves toward that thing. So, and you're such a great example of a generator, Erica. You're making sacral sounds like, that's a sacral sound. That means you're connected to your sacral. Like listen to your sounds. If you're a generator, like it's going to sound like, like you're going to make sounds all day long, and listen to them because they're always guiding where you're going.
So if you could touch on a little bit, just out of curiosity, because when I saw emotional generator, I was like, okay, well, obviously I'm a generator, but the emotional obviously threw me off. So if you could touch on just a little bit, the authority of what does that mean? Just the simple, and then we could go into the rest of them.
Yes. So emotional authority, about 50% of the population is going to have emotional authority, and you have emotional authority. I have emotional authority. If you have emotional authority, your life operates on a consistent emotional wave. And when you're emotional, so you have emotional authority, it doesn't mean you're like crying on the floor all the time, up, whatever. And like emotions are actually a nervousness in the body. It's a sense of like this just wave that has a consistent way of operating. And so some people's are very, very steady. Some people's have sharp peaks and plummets. Some people's kind of slowly rises and then plummets if expectation isn't met. You have, depending on what we call channels are lit up in your chart, you have anywhere between 1 and 7 emotional waves. And within emotionals, I touched on it a little bit when I was responding to the question about how has human design changed my life. But in regards to decision making, when you have emotional authority, you don't necessarily have truth in the now. And I'll explain what this looks like. For you, it's going to look like your friend. And let me just preface this, for emotionals, to make decisions, you want to make decisions when you're in emotional neutrality. So not a high, not a low, just about 70% clear. And I'm less concerned when you're in a low, because when you're in a low, you're usually not making decisions. I'm concerned about when you're in a high.
Yeah.
So this is what it's going to look like. Your friend texts you and is like, let's go on a walk. And you're like in a really great mood. You're super excited. You haven't seen this friend in a while. And you say yes. And all of a sudden you start getting ready for this walk and your emotions start to dip a little bit. And you're like, I don't know if I want to go on the walk. And then they rise and they dip. And then they rise and they find neutrality. And it's a no. You really don't want to go on the walk. But, now you're in your head. You're like, well, it's only half an hour. It's a beautiful day. I should get some exercise. I ditched my friend last time. You're all in your head about this decision versus just being like potentially, hey, thank you so much. Like, I'll let you know when I know. I'll get back to you. Giving yourself a little bit of time as an emotional, especially if you're in a heightened state, is the most important thing. Sometimes you do have truth in the now, but oftentimes you don't. Oftentimes you don't know you're at. It's kind of the example of when I said scheduling this podcast.
Yeah.
I don't schedule so far in advance, even with sessions or anything, because I don't know where I'm going to be, how I'm going to feel, if that's going to be the most aligned energy. And so what I will say with the emotions is this has to do with your strategy. For you as a generator, you respond, and then instead of making decisions with the head, it's literally like the solar plexus area in your body. Does that feel like there's a nervousness, whether high or low, or do you feel neutral? And if you're neutral, go ahead and make the decision. And I would say within human design in general, this is an experiment. This is an experience to experiment with. And more times than not, what happens when you start surrendering to your authority is that your mind is actually freed up to do what it's meant to do. Because what I will say with the authority, because I'm not going to get to going through all the different authorities, there's 7 of them. But if you know nothing, if you take nothing away from this entire podcast, it's this: the mind is never the authority. The mind is never the thing that makes the decisions for us. The mind is so good about solving things for other people. It's so good about analyzing and researching and evaluating and conceptualizing, but it's actually really terrible at making decisions for us. And so the more and more you learn to, operate through your strategy, to surrender to your authority, not only just decisions become easier and more aligned, but you don't feel the mental pressure to like weigh pro cons lists because you trust yourself and you begin to trust any and all decisions you make.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So going into the other one. So manifesting generator, I guess, would be the next one, right?
Manifesting generator. So that is what I am. Manifesting generators are kind of a hybrid between manifestors and generators. They're these multi-passionate, multi-talented forces that kind of have a generator's drive with a manifestor's ability to initiate. And manifesting generators are always going to look a little bit all over the place. They're never going to be on a linear path. You're kind of here to dabble in all things that light you up and be inherently efficient, to kind of gain mastery really quickly and then move on to the next thing and then move on to the next thing. And then you always go back to the things that are right for you. And so manifesting generators have a lot of shame from childhood about like being flaky or being non-committal or changing their minds often. And what I will say is really, really important, because the strategy is kind of a hybrid between generators and manifestors in that it starts in response. So similar to the manifesting generator starts in response, but that's not when they start committing. Then they start dabbling in what does that experience feels like. Like, let's say that the friend asks you to go on a walk. They don't just tap into their authority. They start by like envisioning, they respond, they move towards it, they envision, what does it feel like to get into the walk? Maybe I start putting on some clothes, maybe I get a water bottle. And then they have what we call a moment of truth, where their energy either goes to 0 or 100. And so it could be like opening the door where it's suddenly a yes or no. And so a lot of times manifesting generators are told you need to know right away. And they start getting into, trying a new hobby, trying a new thing. And they suddenly have this moment of truth and they realize it's not for me. And then they have a lot of shame on it. And so manifesting generators, I actually find, have oftentimes more health issues than anyone, because they force themselves to keep going on things that are not aligned. It was definitely my story. Manifesting generators, I feel like, are more often diagnosed with ADHD than any other type, because they're a little bit all over the place, but it's actually, there's always a method to the madness. And so if you're an MG, what I would say is you are allowed to let things go. You are allowed to let things go. You are allowed to dabble in all the things. And not only that, you actually will be more efficient, more successful, and just like have more energy when you do. And also allow yourself to have periods where you just kind of dabble and let openness come in so that you can jump in full force to whatever the next thing is going to be. And similar to so I think I don't know if I talked with generators. When you're out of alignment, for generators, it's frustration. And when you're in alignment, it's satisfaction, just a deep sense of satisfaction. For manifesting generators, when you're out of alignment, it's both the signatures, as we call them, for manifestor and generator. You'll feel anger, frustration. When you're in alignment, satisfaction and peace.
And then what's the other twos? Reflectors
and reflectors.
Yeah.
The projectors are kind of like the birds on the tree. Projectors are like the wise guys that see other people's energies and are here to kind of guide and direct the energy of the other energy types. And so what's really, really interesting about projectors is that they have a strategy of waiting for the invitation recognition. And so I have a lot of projectors come to me and they read some things about this and they feel super disempowered because they're like, what do you mean? I'm just supposed to like lay around and wait for the invitation? That doesn't seem fair. But what's so important is that when you are aligned as a projector, there's never not an invitation, similar to how there's never not something to respond to as a generator or manifesting generator. But a lot of times projectors have seen things their whole life. They have great advice. They see how things run. They see how things could get better, how things improve. They're not necessarily supposed to like keep up with everyone else and try to like force and power their way through things. But they're really here to be kind of these sage wisdom holders. And what's really interesting though is that even as young children with this great advice, oftentimes they can force the advice onto other people and it's not received. So let's say, for example, you're a projector and you have this friend who's been coming to you with this relationship problem for years, and you give your advice and the friend like doesn't listen to you at all, and suddenly the person next to you gives them the same advice and they're like, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard, I'm going to go. And the projectors are like, why doesn't anyone ever listen to me? And here's the thing, in order to create an invitation, because projectors always have something wise to say or guidance or things that they see, but they might have shut it down or have sometimes a shadow is like hiding and not letting yourself be seen as a projector just because of conditioning. And one of the best things to do is to ask questions. I have an idea. Are you open to hearing about it? It's an immediate way to open and create an invitation. And the way that your energy is received is so much better, so much more fluid, and will get you to your signature, which is success. When you're out of alignment, you can feel a lot of bitterness. And so if you're a projector, what I will say is just allow yourself to ask lots of questions, allow yourself to be seen. Know that if you feel like things are not working out, you might be forcing something in a way that's not actually how your energy is best received by the other. And know that you are here to be seen. And you have such gifts in being able to see things in such a specific way, in such a way that is so aligned to you, and that it's here to be seen by the world.
Mm-hmm. Before we go on to the last one, I'm just curious, if somebody doesn't have their birth time, as I had to search for my birth certificate, can they distinguish what their type is, or like, is there a way around that?
Yeah. So with human design, it's a little bit different from astrology in that birth time is really important, but just because things can change massively throughout a day. So sometimes what I do when I don't have a birth time, when we have around the time, I'll pull up like 4 different charts and see how much it changes. If it changes drastically, we're going to have to get more specific. Sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes it doesn't change because it's astrological based but just way more nuanced. But there's also there's like highly skilled astrologers that can help do what we call rectification, astrological rectification. Sometimes I use a pendulum to figure out birth times, and we can get really, really accurate with that. So I will say it's important. It's very important. So in any way you can, if you were born in a hospital, usually if you call, they have every record of every baby born. And so that's been a cool way for a lot of people to get them if your hospital is still.
And I even to get my birth certificate, because I did lose it in moving and whatnot. So I actually just ordered one. I think it's like $25. So you can order it. You just need to know where you're born. Yeah. So that's great. Okay. Good to know that. So the last one is the reflector.
The last one is the reflector, and reflectors are only about 1% of the population. I think I said manifestors are 8 to 10. I think the percentages for the others are kind of off. I think they're all about the same. They're all around 25 to 30%. Initially, they said, generators are about 35%, manifesting generators are about 32, projectors are about 25, but we're having a big rise in projectors. So I think those three are all around the same percentage per population. But reflectors are only about 1% of the population. And if you look at a reflector's chart, every single one of those triangles and squares, which are known as the centers, they're effectively like the chakra points in the human design chart. They're all open. They're all white. Reflectors are like the cosmic mirrors for society. Reflectors probably are listening to all the other types and probably relate to all of the types, because reflectors are very, very environmentally impacted, very, very impacted by who they're around. And they're here to kind of be these mirrors and these witnesses to their environments, to their surroundings. And a reflector's strategy is really interesting. It's to wait a full moon cycle. And the reason why reflectors are, it's not for the small things. So if you're a reflector, you don't have to wait a full moon cycle in order to figure out what you want to have for dinner. But reflectors are what we call lunar beings, where every other energy type is a solar being. And reflectors are highly, highly, as we all are, but reflectors just amplified, influenced by the cycles of the moon. So for example, when the moon is in Sagittarius, which Sagittarius is all about travel, expansion, all of a sudden, and the moon moves through every sign for about 2.5 days. All of a sudden, the reflector's like, I want to quit my job and travel the world. I would say, okay, let's come back to that in a month, because in 2.5 days, the moon's going to be in Capricorn. And Capricorn is, very business oriented. It rules banking. So potentially the reflector goes to a dinner party with all these bankers and all of a sudden decides, I want to become a banker. That's who I am. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's let it wait a month, because in 2.5 days, the moon's going to move into Aquarius, and Aquarius is very humanitarian, very free spirit. And so suddenly the reflector wants to shave their head and do the Peace Corps. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's wait a month. And so reflectors really can almost become whoever they're around, which is such a gift. And it can be very, very confusing though for reflectors when they're very, very young. So what I will say is just give yourself time and allow yourself to explore all of the different identities that you want to be and that you want to try on and you want to experience. And then also just notice health-wise for reflectors, if how you feel in different environments, because environment really, really does impact majorly. And notice that you're such a reflection of your environment. And so if there are areas that you feel less good around, if there are people that you feel not as good around, just take note of that. But you're here to feel a deep sense of surprise is actually the signature, like feeling super, super surprised and like just excited by all the possibilities of life. And when you're out of alignment as a reflector, it can feel a deep sense of disappointment.
Okay, so knowing all that, which is a whole lot, that's just a summary. So of course, if you looked at your chart, and at least you could know what you are as what you described it as. But in curiosity, if somebody were to work with you or somebody that is a specialist in human design, what will they gain out of it? Like, how does a session, or I don't even know how it looks. If somebody were to work with you, what does it look like? How are you going to work with them, and what are they going to gain from it?
Do you have your chart in front of you?
Yes. And it's, again, like lots of confusing things.
Yeah, I think the best way is I'll do a little mini reading right now.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Cause this is intriguing, right? I mean, what I love is how you speak, how human design is really to connect you to your soul. It's like and like you said, to live your expression and like full expression of who you are made to be and live in alignment. So I don't know who doesn't want that. So if this is a tool that we could utilize, amazing, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't know what you want me to read, but
yeah, could you share it possibly?
Let's see.
We're doing the thing. And the reason I ask is because that I read, there's so many nuances to everything within the chart. And yeah, great. Just scroll down a tiny bit. Amazing. Okay. So Erica, the first thing I'm going to say, you are a 4-6. So we're just diving into a couple aspects of her chart. This has to do with your profile. And when you are a 4-6, or when you have your profile in general, you're actually a lot more like other people of the same profile than other people of the same energy type. And so For sixes, the four in that is all about your community. Your community is everything. Your people are everything. You are a connector in every way. Your mind is lit up by when you're around the right people. And you're also very, very sensitive to your community because you give so much to everyone that you're around, to everyone that you connect with. And it's very, very important to thrive, to find the right people that feed you as well and are reciprocal as well. Fours can be, I mean, when I think of fours, it's like the ultimate networker, and it's the ultimate person who understands just that everything comes through connections. So oftentimes when I see fours too, even like within work, it's way less about looking for the people that are outside of your network and way more about investing in time and energy of those who feed you the most and who really, really see your heart, and making sure that that you are fed in that way. And then with the six, now, the six for you, the second number in your profile is unconscious. It's something that's more karmic. It's that other people see in you, you don't see as readily in yourself. But the six is the ultimate role model in all of society. Six, you came out of the womb worldly and wise beyond your years, who has always had a perspective of things that's kind of like looking from above. And what happens with a lot of sixes, I'm a six as well, I'm a six too, is that you don't really understand why people do the things they do. Like, you don't understand projection. You don't understand naturally in your being, like, why there is division. And so sometimes sixes will try to like go down and understand humans, even though they don't really understand it. You'll go and investigate and figure out why people do the things that they do, or why there is projection. But really where you're supposed to live is more up in your own lane. You're not supposed to dive into the drama. You're not supposed to dive into the division. You're supposed to be, I always think like six is the connection to spirit, and you're really here to be your own spirit, your free spirit. You're viewing from your own personal experiences. And what's interesting is anyone who has a six line in their profile, your life operates in kind of three distinct phases. It doesn't have to, but oftentimes you will see this through the phases. So the first 30 years, it's like you live more lifetimes than anyone does in their entire lifetime. It's like trial and error. It's like more experiences than anything. It's like you are constantly reinventing yourself, not because you're trying to, just because you've chosen almost as a soul to come into this lifetime that has just needs to get a lot of personal experience in order to really share the wisdom that you're meant to, and really be this embodied role model that you are and that you've always been. But sometimes it can be very, very confusing. Relationships can be confusing because they can be intense and like very karmic. You can have very, very karmic relationships. And it's interesting because by the time you hit 30, you're like, okay, that was a lot. Like, you're on this process between 30 and 50 called being on the roof. And when you're on the roof, you're really like connecting the dots, and almost think of it like standing on the roof of a house and seeing why everything happened the way it happened. You're seeing why this happened here, and you're building with it. You're building with what you've learned. You're building with what you've experienced. You're starting to put together the pieces, and things settle down in terms of like the chaos of potentially the first stage. By the time you reach 50, and this is your entire life, by the time you reach 50, you're like the ultimate role model in all of society. You've embodied the wisdom, you've connected the dots, you've put everything together, and you are that your whole life. You just don't necessarily see it, but it's such a huge aspect to who you are. And so the more and more you're someone, so you have an open identity, you're someone who, it's so interesting that we're doing this, because when I talked about the reflector, and this is where there's so much nuance in the charts, you have a very open chart in a lot of way. And so you are someone that can identify with people from all walks of life. Someone can stand in front of you and you know exactly who they are, sometimes even more than you know yourself. And what's really interesting is that when you have an open identity, when we live in a world that's like, you need to know who you are, you need to know your purpose. Actually, you didn't come in here needing to know that, because you could do this thing and that thing and connect to this and that. And so what's so important for any open identity is that you get to choose who you want to be again and again and again. Your identity is not fixed. It's very, very fluid. And if there's any aspects of your identity, you have two gates. one, you're a leader and you're here to be a recognized leader. If this is a very, very democratic type of leadership, it's not a leadership that forces itself to be a leader. It's a leadership where other people recognize you because you understand that the greatest service of leadership is for the good of the whole, and then put you into that position of leadership. And then you also have this love gate called the love of, it's like the ultimate humanitarian. It's the love of humanity. And it's someone who truly sees the humanity and the love in everyone, and also is not here to be tied down by life, not here to be you're here to be on your own flow. So you're not here to be doing things because other people told you need to do that or that. It's like very much about just being in the flow of your own life. You also came into this life as an open heart with nothing to prove at all, but because of conditioning, you could feel like you need to prove yourself even more societally. And so what happens with open hearts is it can be very, very confusing when you're really young, because, you know, this person over here can be motivated by getting the paycheck or getting the car. And then your heart can actually amplify that and feel like you need to get that even more. And then you actually probably get it, the paycheck, the car, whatever it is, even quicker, but you're not fulfilled. And then you get this thing, like you think you need to be motivated by that or prove yourself through this. And anyone with an open heart, you're not necessarily here to be motivated by material things. You can have all the material things in the world, but it's not the motivation. And so much of this is like tapping into how do you want to feel, understanding and like connecting back to yourself on, is this actually my desire or is this someone else's? And you have this energy of total integrity in your heart. It's a gate of sales. It's actually a very, very good salesperson. But by that, what I mean is like selling an idea, selling a creative concept, a creative process. And I want to just touch on your, see, I get in the role of things.
There's so much, right?
Yeah. But your emotional wave, I just want to touch on that, your emotional wave and your mind before I stop myself, because I could just keep going.
Right.
That I saw that you said when you had like a little bit like, oh, I'm an emotional generator. You actually have the most steady of all of the emotional waves. And it only flares in intimate relationships.
Oh, completely.
So, yeah. So yours is like very, very steady all the time, unless it's like an intimate relationship conflict, which is where it flares. So I would just notice.
I could agree.
Yeah, right. It's like, so when you read emotional, it's like, you know, you could relate to that, could not, but your underlying frequency, it has this direct connection to your sacral. And so your sacral, like literally your gut feelings are always guiding you. And it's something to note. And then just other things. You're very, very psychic, in case you didn't already know. You're very, very tuned in. You have, and you might not know that because it's what we call an outer aspect. It's a very transformative aspect in your chart, but you're very, very intuitive. And your mind has almost these like downloads where it's as if you could try to be putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, but if you try to force them together, it's not going to work. But then when you find times of rest, relaxation, of like taking a shower, going on a walk, suddenly it's like everything comes into place, like everything organized
to that.
And so it might feel like you have a certain amount of mental pressure that is consistent in your being, but it's like it works on its own rhythm and pulse, where all of a sudden it's like the ideas come straight through your being and everything makes into place. So,
wow.
And then the final thing I'll say to you.
Yeah.
If you have a motto, and this is such an important aspect of who you are, because you're someone who's here to go after your desires. You're someone who has incredible perseverance and commitment energy. You're someone who is such a connector and someone who really understands how to bring creativity and put it in the right places and make sure it's just creativity is such a core to who you are. But you're also someone who's here to go after your passion projects, because passion projects with the universal good in mind can lead to prosperity for you. You can find yourself and that can look in any and all ways, but you're someone who's here to so follow that internal, whatever that passion is, whatever that thing that's lighting you up in however many ways it reforms again and again. It will expand everything. It's highly individual, it's highly mutative, and it's really, really potent and really powerful. And so it's a more unconscious aspect of your chart, but it's something that's here to really
Wow.
not only ground you, but like bring you into the world. And so I would say if you have one motto, just to know, passion projects with the universal good in mind can lead to prosperity.
That is so great, because I feel that is so much what I'm driven for, is living a passionate life that is going to make a huge impact and ripple in the world. Obviously, I have this podcast, that's one avenue, but there's so many more things that have come to mind of how I want to share that. So I'm going to stop the share, but that's amazing. I know this was obviously very personal, what she shared, but of course, basically what you're learning is how she walks through your chart and describes how you best operate and how you could be in alignment with that. So that's so amazing. So basically, when you work with somebody, you're able to read their chart and kind of walk them through everything and answer the questions, of course, how to use that for their benefit in their own life. Amazing. So intriguing as well. So intriguing.
And so different too. So different. So there's a little peak of going really fast through a couple aspects of a chart, but every single reading, and this is what I'll say, every single reading is totally different because people come for different things. Sometimes we focus just on business and look at specific areas in business. Sometimes we look at relationships. Sometimes it's more open all over the place. Sometimes it's more specific on fear. Like every single session, every single way I navigate a chart it's intuitively guided, but it's also guided in a way that I kind of mold it to fit your needs. So if we were doing an actual session, it would probably look different because we talk about what are the intentions that you have, but just as a way of just picking at a couple aspects of what it would look like. That's kind of a little sneak peek.
And then you mentioned the strategies. Why is that so important?
Yeah. So the strategies are important because if your energy isn't flowing in alignment, it's like, it doesn't matter how gifted you are in all of the different amazing areas. You're gifted, you're almost creating a block for that energy to flow. So the more and more you allow yourself to, like for you, for example, respond to life and realize that it doesn't have to be hard. Like life is flowing to you and you always have the opportunity to commit to things that are showing up in your outer reality. And that could even be an idea that then materializes. The more and more you realize that your energy can be funneled in a way that it doesn't feel forced, that it doesn't feel hard, that doesn't feel taxed or challenged. And so I would say just understanding the strategy and playing with the strategy, experimenting with it. You know, if it doesn't work for you, you don't like it, that's great. I'm not here to convince anyone, but what I find is that the more and more you allow it, and I just know for myself, the more and more you get to your destination, if you were to have a destination, in a way that feels really, really good. And so I don't think that, right, I just reiterate again and again, we need a system like this. And I see a ton of people who are super quote unquote successful that are totally not doing this and totally out of alignment. But a lot of times I see these people and they come to me and they're so miserable, even though they've made it and even though they have all the success and the accolades of whatever the world tells them that they need to have. And so if we can do that in a way that feels really, really good in the process and feels really full of life, I think that that's all we could ask for. That's all I could hope for.
Absolutely. And is it a good idea to know somebody else's human design?
I think it is. It's like one of the first questions I ask everyone, do you know your birth time? It's like, it's a love language for me because for me, seeing this is just for me personally, knowing someone's human design just like gives me so much. I'm in awe of every single different chart and every single chart I see and just like the full potential of humanity and so much more. But I think it is because it shows a lens into just the different nuances of how we operate and why a lot of conflict potentially happens in the world of people we just see in different ways, right? We have different ways. We're all doing the best we can, but we have different ways of operating. And so when we can have more compromise in relationships or start to just understand why people do the things they do and accept it, I think it brings not only such a deeper level of intimacy, but a connection in a way that the relationship thrives. So I love doing that. I love doing relationship readings, but I think absolutely pulling up charts of other people, friends, lovers, acquaintances, anyone in your life is
well, one of the best selling books of all time is The 5 Love Languages. And that really is knowing how somebody operates and how informative that is to know somebody else's love language. So then you could make sure you're addressing really how they feel love. So that's one of the best selling books of all time. And Human Design is another, as you say, system to really have the map of your soul. So I think it's so intriguing. Like I said, if you were to recommend some books that people could learn more about this, or websites they should go to get more in-depth knowledge, if they're not going to go to you, which of course I'll leave everything in the show notes of how they can work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite books are by Chetan Parkin and Karen Curry Parker. I don't have the names, but if you Google Chetan Parker or Karen Curry Parker, they both have great books and are we call first stage human design readers. And then there's a definitive book on human design by Ra Uru, which is good, but it's kind of like alien language leading. It's very, very dense. And so if you're not into like all of the logistics of it, I would definitely refer to the Chetan Parkin or Karen Curry Parker books before then. And then it's so beautiful because there's so much information online now. Like, 5 years ago, there was nothing. Yeah. There was nothing. It was looking at the manuscripts of the original teacher of human design and basically his live manuscripts of speaking in different assemblies. But now there's so many different voices in the space. And so what I would say is like, do a little exploring and check in, Google human design and see what websites or what things that you fall in line with and check them out comparatively to others and see if what languaging is really right for you. Because I think what's such a beautiful thing in a space that's growing so much is that there are so many different voices that are able to meet everyone that's right. I would say my Human Design Lady Instagram account, I created it so that you can scroll all the way down to the beginning of my account and go through different aspects of your chart, go through all of your centers, go through as kind of a resource just to help support if you're new to human design.
And you have 2 Instagrams, your personal and then a Human Design Lady. So what's your personal IG?
My personal is at Katie Calder _.
Okay. And where can people learn more about you so they could possibly work with you, which would be amazing.
Yeah. So katiecalder.com is my website. I have one-on-one sessions. I have tons of master classes, which are, they're each 2 hours on different types, on different things. So that's a really, really great resource to start. And then I think my website would be the best place, that or my Instagrams, to connect. And I always love connecting with new communities and just learning more about your community. And yeah, that would be the place to be.
Amazing. Well, just in closure, I always ask my guests one particular question, and I love the diverse answers. So if you were to leave a piece of advice, anything it would be that you feel anybody needs to hear right now, what would it be?
Allow yourself to play.
And expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think play is the number one way to stay youthful. So
allow yourself to play, allow yourself to explore, allow yourself to experience and experiment with all of the things that you have potentially been tapping on your shoulder, but might be scared to. I believe that play doesn't just look like, it doesn't happen in one sort of way. It can happen through all aspects of life. And the more and more we allow kind of a curiosity within everything, a curiosity within just being, the more and more we expand as souls, as humans, as people experiencing this existence. And so I say play more because oftentimes in this world, we take it really seriously. Like I think a lot of people, we take everything super serious, right? Everything's super serious. And when you can come back to a sense of joy and realize, yeah, it's serious, but it's also not that serious, your world expands. And so I think in this very now moment, which could be different in a future now moment, I would say allow yourself to play even just in little ways and see how your world expands through that.
Beautiful. I love how you expanded that. That was absolutely so necessary to hear that because, as you said, so many people, we take life seriously, and
Totally.
as we should in certain aspects, of course, but sometimes we could just let go and surrender to life and just be willing to be curious, play a bit. And I always say, like, play keeps you youthful. Like when you see an older lady, a 90-year-old lady, and she's playing Jenga, I don't know, I'm just throwing out something like, how amazing is that? Imagine a 90-year-old lady playing Jenga. That is just, how freeing is that she's just playing and able to be so free and so joyful in that experience. So play more. I love it. Great advice. Well, Katie, this has been so much fun. I love sharing this space with you and just getting to know you. And thank you for sharing all the work you do. And thank you for reading my chart. And I hope that was helpful to many of you. And of course, everything will be in the show notes to learn more about Katie and work with her. And yeah, this has been such an honor. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for having me. And thank you for everyone who's listened.
Thank you.